You're listening to Predictions, the podcast where we talk about the future and we try to see into the future. I'm your host, Konstantin.
And I am Ingmar Schubert. Hello.
So, because for today, our question is about, we want to talk about battery electric vehicles, we want to talk about hybrid electric cars, we want to talk about hydrogen cars, we want to talk about the future of mobility in terms of what will propulse our cars. And as our prediction question, we discussed a bit and we came up with this following question. What is going to be the number or the percentage of battery electric vehicles among the newly registered vehicles in 2030. So in 2030, if I'm the person who has people coming to me who register their cars, what share of people will register purely battery electric vehicles? And we're kind of not thinking about trucks so much, we're more thinking about cars for personal use. And yeah, Ingmar, do you have a number?
Yeah, if you look around a little bit and do some research on what other people think about that, the numbers are really all over the place. And this is just because it's just crazy to try to predict that from now. And this is also why it's so fun. So I'm just going to say that I think that like the integrated value, right, of all electric cars available on the roads in 2030, will be around 10%.
Okay, so you're not talking about the newly registered vehicles.
No,
I'm talking about the total vehicles.
Yeah, because because this is a little bit, less volatile, right?
Uh-huh.
And you have to take into account that also like car ownership in general is still massively increasing worldwide, right? Not in the developed countries, but in emerging countries.
Okay.
And right now we have something like 1 billion, a little bit more, of cars.
Mm-hmm.
And and electric vehicles are something like 1% of that, more or less, like order of magnitude. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that I expect one more order of magnitude increase. So 10%. By 2030s of or electric vehicles, or let's just say battery electric vehicles, because frankly, at the level of accuracy we are at, this doesn't really matter. So whichever you prefer.
Okay. Well, I mean, we will go into the why a little bit later, but let me just give my number. I think I had a similar number in mind, but I was trying to think about the number of newly registered vehicles by that time. If you think about the percentage of battery electric vehicles among the total registered vehicles, of course, then you also have to consider the vehicles that are registered today and that are still around in 2030, right? So I think in that case, I would more talk about maybe 3% of battery electric vehicles. And if I talk about the newly registered vehicles, I would say 11%. So I would say in 2030. And the reason why I think that is, I think battery electric vehicles will remain a niche product. If you talk about purely battery electric vehicles, I think because the one main cost driver in an electric car is the battery. And the one main cost driver in a battery is not actually the production process, but it's the resources. Resources like cobalt. And these resources are very limited. Then currently known cobalt reserves in the world, I think, are about 8.7 million. I checked it before the podcast. And if you look at these reserves, the exploitable reserves of cobalt, you would actually not be able to electrify every car that drives nowadays using that amount of cobalt, using today's battery technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, of course, there may be a chance to improve the technology, to get better batteries that use less cobalt, use less expensive resources. But I think there will always be trade-offs in that. And so I think it will get a bit better than it's today. So they will be more popular than they are today. But I think they will still be a niche product, the purely battery electric vehicles, just because the battery kind of creates a price floor, a minimum selling price, and that will keep it above a competition like a petrol car.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because like the number you said and the number I said really correspond to very optimistic for mine and more conservative estimates that you can also find when you do your research. And I think what you already touched on, namely that the resource costs are the main driver of the costs of a battery electric vehicle nowadays, or even in the future if we remain using the same battery technology, is the key point to that, because all those estimates that yield higher numbers, like 10% for the 2030s, all rely on the assumption in some way that we are able to drive down the battery costs by some technological innovation. So I think it really depends. I mean, the question whether battery electric vehicles will become widely adopted or will remain a niche product really depends on whether you believe that there will a breakthrough in technology or not. Right?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the funny thing is, or not so funny thing, is that if you look at the current, even if you have 10% of all vehicles being battery electric, if you assume that the other 90% are burning fossil fuels, and if you assume that the number of vehicles in the world will keep growing, then we have a problem, right?
Sure.
Because 2030 is 10 years into the future. So just from a climate political point of view, even your optimistic prediction is pretty doomsday.
Sure, but I mean,
scenario.
I mean, 10% worldwide is really a massive number, right? I mean, like in the developed countries, that would mean more like something like 30-40%. I'm not sure, but the point is really that the time it takes for those types of innovations to trickle down to emerging or non-developed countries, I mean, it's just 10 or 20 years. So it's still like 10% doesn't sound like much, and it's probably not enough. But if that happens, it will really mean a massive change, even though it doesn't sound like so much.
Yeah.
So, maybe let me put it differently. If you have 10% of battery electric vehicles in 2030, it will mean that we have like 30-40% by 2040. Just because this gets like pushed through the market over time.
Yeah, see, that's why I wanted to talk about percentage of newly registered vehicles, because the integrated number is kind of hides a lot of stuff. But I mean, yeah, sure, but it's it's still a bad scenario to have only 10% battery electric vehicles in 2030. I think it's much lower because of this price floor that is set by the battery price, and because I'm not super optimistic that the prices will go down while maintaining battery performance, maintaining battery safety, maintaining charging speed, all these things. So there will be trade-offs, and I think battery electric vehicles will be a car for enthusiasts, for people who really value the performance, people maybe who really value the simplicity. I think something that the battery electric cars have going for them is that they're very simple, right? If you look at the battery as a single unit, which you shouldn't, but if you look at it as just a simple thing, then it's really just you have a battery, you have a motor, and you have a throttle, and that's it. And you don't even really need brakes because you can use a motor for braking. So it's that simple. And simple solutions, never bet against the roundabout, like never bet against a simple solution that replaces a complex system. And I think I wouldn't bet against battery electric vehicles because of that. But I think they're resource constrained. And if you look at different technologies that have gone down in price a lot, let's say, look at solar cells, look at semiconductor technologies like a CPU, all of these things are things where the materials are cheap. And you end up having a production process that's very expensive, but then you scale the process and the product themselves goes down. But if you look at things that are where the materials are what drives the main cost, yeah. For example, if you look just plainly at commodities such as coal, right, where you have no production process or almost no production process, it's all about the material. No, actually, it's not. It's the extraction process, right? The cost of the extraction process. Okay, so my argument is breaking down a bit. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not super confident that the price of materials goes down, and if it doesn't, then there is nothing you can do in terms of scale to fix the battery prices.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those silicon-based technologies you just cited are really a good example because like it's just sand, right? So the material isn't worth anything, and this is why you have those exponential cost laws like Moore's law, famous Moore's law. Yeah. This is due to the fact that the material is basically zero cost, and it's all about production.
So I'm thinking that we will see more hybrid cars, and I think that we will see more battery electric. Hybrid cars, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles.
Yeah, FEV.
So this means you have a hybrid car that has a gas engine, it has a tank where you can put gas, but it also has a small battery, and you can charge that small battery. So on a daily trip to the supermarket, to work, you drive completely on the battery, you charge it at night. But if you go for a long distance trip, or if you forget to charge at night, or you're visiting some people that don't have a battery at home, then you just run from the petrol engine. And that I think that's very nice because it allows you to have a much smaller battery and reduces the battery cost. At the same time, of course, it increases the complexity of the car above the complexity of today's petrol car, right? So now you have a petrol car and also a battery car. So you're paying for double the technology in there and double the things that can break down. And that's only economical if you save so much money on fuel that it's worth having this electric drivetrain in there. Or maybe you're able to have a smaller petrol engine. Maybe you're able to have something like a range extender only, like a petrol engine that really just charges the battery, but isn't really able to power your car. So you always just drive through the electric motor, and the range extender powers your battery. But I feel like that's a much better compromise because now you have a car that can actually do all the things a petrol car can do. But you also have a car that has all the advantages of an electric car, almost all the advantages, at the price of higher complexity. But if you look 10 years into the future, I feel like this complexity maybe is easier to handle than the resource constraints of battery cars. And so I feel like that's a more pragmatic approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all, I think it really comes down to whether you believe that there will be a technological breakthrough with batteries or not. If there won't
threat.
Yeah, I mean, if there won't won't be any technological improvements, I agree. It's not realistic that we will have a widespread adoption of electric cars because then you just can't do anything about the cost. And of course, it's heavily subsidized right now, but this is not something that you can keep up sustainably. So this will, I mean, the development will just slow down and But on the other hand, if that happens, and maybe it's not so crazy to assume that because right now we're seeing huge investments into research and development of batteries. So I wouldn't say it's too much of a stretch to believe that there will be some improvements in battery technology. And if that happens, we might see much more affordable batteries, and then that will totally change the landscape. And I think if we get the battery raw materials price below a certain threshold, then it will be a pretty clear win for battery electric vehicles in the long run. But this is just something that's impossible to extrapolate, right?
No. I mean, for plug-in hybrids, I'm actually optimistic, but not because I think they will just win by themselves, because I think they're technologically so complex they will be actually more expensive to buy. And then you will need all the charging infrastructure. So you need some political kickoff at least to enable the charging infrastructure, to enable the environment in which you can actually use your your plug-in hybrid and charge it every day, and only then it will be beneficial for you in terms of cost. But I'm optimistic because I think that political environment will happen, because I think most nations are waking up to climate change. I think most people are aware of the urgency to do something, and I think these kind of plug-in hybrids are very easy outs, very easy fixes that you can create. Coming back to the research question, I think you're rightfully pointing out that if you throw a lot of money on a problem and you do a lot of research on it, usually you get some progress, right? And that's sometimes maybe that's a bit ignorant of me to pretend like all of that research is not happening. I think with all kinds of research, there's always the question in what kind of category of problem you're dealing with, right? If I'm trying to research something that's against the laws of physics, I'm not gonna get there, right? I cannot research a way to transmit information from one side to the other side of the Earth in less than light speed. So that I can put any budget behind that. It's not going to work. And I don't know where batteries stand, if they are like that, or if we are hitting physical boundaries. I mean, we are already using lithium ions because they're very light. Yet at the same time, in terms of energy per weight, if you look at a battery, if you look at gasoline, you have like a factor 100, almost like a factor 80 or something. So for the same amount of energy, you need 80 times more weight in a battery than in a car. Sorry, than in petrol, and that seems like a pretty big gap to bridge.
Yeah, I mean,
but maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe you just need a factor 2.
I'm not so sure. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know. But to me, it just feels like, I mean, it's basically about finding a good chemical reaction that you can build at large scale to store energy, right? And I just think that this is a very, this is a problem you have many variables to. So there's probably a lot to explore. So this is just my totally, very, very basic take on this that I don't know. I mean, it's definitely not like super clear that you can't do anything about it, but I actually don't know.
Maybe the chemical reaction is having hydrogen react with oxygen. And you have a fuel cell, and you have a hydrogen electric car, and you don't have a battery. What do you think about that? Do you think that's competitive with batteries?
Well, I mean, what is the problem right now about hydrogen? And I think this is also something you can't really do much about, is that it's just much worse in terms of efficiency. So I think even if you assume very conservative numbers, energy to actually driving power conversion efficiency is around 25% for hydrogen cars.
Yeah, and to put that into perspective, on a battery you have about 73%. So if you look at the energy that you put in to charge a battery versus the energy that you actually end up having on the wheels, it's about 73% of the energy that you put in. So that's a much better factor. But I think it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter because I think energy, especially electric energy, especially off-peak electric energy, is cheap or is almost free. And so even if you need 3 times the amount of energy to create a hydrogen, it doesn't matter because it's free. I think what matters at the end is the cost of storage. In particular, how many kilometers can you drive before your battery needs to be replaced? How many kilometers can you drive before your fuel cell needs to be replaced? And that for me is not immediately clear that one is better than the other. I think what's holding back fuel cells nowadays is the infrastructure. It's just not there. Like with the battery electric vehicles, you can kind of plug into an existing grid, literally. Like you just have to put up some charging stations, but you don't even have to. You can plug into your wall. And with the hydrogen cars, you need to have a hydrogen fuel station. You need to transport the hydrogen. Hydrogen is hard to transport. It's actually hard to store. It's also dangerous in any aspect. But so are batteries, so is fuel. And so that's holding it back. But I can imagine that, for example, I know that Toyota and Japan as whole is really going all into this hydrogen economy, or really trying to push the research there. And I could imagine that they actually come out with a lead in 5 or 10 years. And we discover that, okay, batteries have hit this floor, but hydrogen keeps coming down in price. And then it may be a place where it starts actually competing with plug-in hybrid electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so I agree there are those two different types of costs, right? There's the cost of energy itself and the cost of storage. And you're kind of assuming that the cost of energy itself will come close to zero in the future. And I wouldn't say that's a completely unreasonable thing to assume. And if you assume that, I agree, then it would speak very much in favor of hydrogen cars. Right now, of course, the energy costs for electricity are not negligible. So I'm not sure, but from today's standpoint, of course, this is a big disadvantage, right? You pay 3 times as much for fuel, basically, at least for a hydrogen car. So there's really nothing you can do about it. And if that disadvantage levels out just because energy costs come down, this will be a big advantage. But I think what we both agree on, because we already talked a little bit about this, is that the charging time to recharge your car, which is like commonly cited as a huge disadvantage of battery electric vehicles, is not really an issue. I mean, already today we're seeing it becoming less and less of an issue, and like in 5 years or so, this won't really play a role. You agree, right?
Yeah, I don't even think it's an issue today anymore. I think you can charge from 20 to 80%. I think that's what matters. You can do it very quickly. 20 minutes, you just go for a pee and have some Snickers and kick a ball around the curb, or just stretch your legs, and you go back into the car and you're good to go for another 300 kilometers. Yeah. And I think that's good enough for 90%, 95% of everybody.
Yeah, for example, just to give an example, like the new version of supercharging from Tesla, the version 3 supercharging, like under ideal conditions when there's nobody else at the charging station and you have perfect temperature and your battery is at, 50% or wherever it charges best, you can already get to 250 watts of charging power out of it. And that means, for example, if you charge your Model 3, that you can get 120 kilometers in 5 minutes. And of course, I mean, those are ideal conditions, and you probably can't assume to have that on a consistent level, but it at least serves as a proof of concept. So if we can already do this today, then I don't see that this should be a problem in 5 years from now.
Yeah. I don't think that's an issue at all. Yeah. I think especially if you take into account that most people, when they just do a daily driving, they come home, they plug their car into the street lamp or their home plug. I mean, you need to assume that there is the battery charging infrastructure, right? You go to your job, you park at your employer, you plug it in. You go home, you park in your garage, you go home, you park at the curb, you plug it in. If you have that, you only really need to charge your car. You only need to really think about charging your car when you're doing long road trips. And there maybe, you spend 10 minutes more than you would usually do stretching relax once in 5 hours or once in 3 hours. And I don't think that matters. Mm-hmm. I think that matters only for people who just are not used to it, who have never driven an electric car. I think once you do it, then you don't care about that. Yeah, I think what matters is price. And I think the price of battery electric cars nowadays looks better than the one of hydrogen cars. I think there is theoretically more potential for hydrogen cars to go down in price than for maybe battery electric cars. But as we said, it really depends on research. I think the case for plug-in hybrids is only is that even with today's technology, they can offer a pretty compelling best of both worlds, where 99% of your kilometers driven, you will always drive electric. The last 1%, maybe 3, 4, 5% of long road trips, you will drive with petrol, but it allows you to have a much smaller battery, and it allows you to have much less emissions. And I think the problem with these is that they are currently much more complex than pure electric cars.
Yeah.
Or pure petrol cars, especially because people still want to be able to drive purely on petrol. I know there was the BMW i3, I think, some years ago, which had a range extender, which actually I think is a very interesting concept. So you have a petrol engine that just exists to charge the battery, so it can be much smaller because it doesn't need to actually provide power to get started or like provide any torque. It just charges the battery. So that may be also a way for hybrids to get cheaper. But I think in the end, there needs to be a certain political will. There needs to be political landscape that forces a certain fuel economies on cars, and if that happens, then I think the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles will win, and I think that will happen in most nations of the world.
Yeah, I think at least in Europe, this is what we see already today, right? Because you have this fleet emission limits.
Yeah,
and this is why
and they're cheating a lot.
Yeah, I mean, especially the German automakers who really like to
cheat
to build big cars. They are all like promoting their plug-in hybrids right now, and I think it's really something that, even though it's as you said, a little bit messy because it's just you have twice the complexity of a normal car, so to speak. It's kind of cool because it acts as a catalyst to hopefully real electric vehicles in the future.
I can imagine a future in 100 years where we will drive with. Imagine the world is saved and we don't all die from climate change, and we have a world in 200 years like we will all drive electric cars with small batteries, and then we have a range extender in the car, and that range extender burns fuel, and that fuel will be petrol, but it will be synthesized petrol. So you can, using electricity, you can create hydrogen gas. From hydrogen gas you can go to methane. From methane you can go through to petrol. So you can actually, from electricity, you can create petrol in a CO2 neutral way. And that's super inefficient, that's super expensive, because you take expensive electricity and then you waste a lot of it and create even less energy in petrol, which is actually much cheaper in terms of energy than electricity. No, it isn't. But it's roughly the same, but you waste a lot in the process. But it's a way to create fuel that's CO2 neutral. And I think that's a good compromise. But yeah, it needs a political landscape, and maybe also maybe you will have a breakthrough with batteries, or you will have a breakthrough with hydrogen, or just constant improvements. Just get a factor 2 in the price, and or factor 0.5 better, and then you suddenly you are in a much different situation.
Yeah.
So my prediction, if you look at newly registered vehicles, I think 10% are electric. I'm looking at newly registered vehicles, and 10% are electric. I think the 70% will be hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and the remaining 20% will be all-style petrol cars. And this is worldwide, actually, for in 10 years. And then if you look at the total fleet, basically all the new technologies, you give them a factor 0.3, so that's like 3% electric, 30%, or like 20% plug-in hybrid, and the rest is going to be all-style petrol, if you look at the complete fleet, including the existing cars. So that's what I think is realistic.
I mean, I think where we disagree is really that you're a little bit more pessimistic about about technological breakthroughs. And this is just something you can't really discuss over. I mean, this is not something you can provide data for. This is just, you have to believe it or you don't. And
we could go really deep into battery technology, evaluate some current approaches, but even there, I think scientists disagree.
Yeah, so. And probably we don't know enough, so we shouldn't do it probably. And
this has never stopped me. Okay, this has never stopped me.
So I personally think that just you're seeing those huge investments, and this has to go somewhere, and just from my outsider's point of view, finding new battery technologies doesn't seem like an unsurmountable task, which is probably pretty ignorant to say, but compared, I don't know, to fusion or something, it just doesn't seem that hard. And this is just my personal ignorant feeling. So I'm more on the side there will be some breakthroughs, and this is why we get to different numbers. But on the other hand, I conditionally agree with you in the case where there's not really much happening in that domain, it will be a lot like you just painted it.
Okay. And do you think we will ever see a car that has a range of, I'd say, more than 500 kilometers for under 20k pure battery electric vehicle? And if you think we will see one like that, when do you think that will be?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is So
that's kind of the holy grail, right? That's the one they want. Like if it's less than 20k, if it goes far enough, people will buy it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is so to speak the Volkswagen Golf for electric vehicles, and I'm going to be optimistic and say that this exists by 2025.
Yeah. Just
purely because I think that battery technology will become cheaper in one way or the other, and then once that happens, of course, this is basically all of the cost of an electric vehicle, and then that's basically doable. 500 kilometers range is not really the problem nowadays to do, but of course it's still very expensive. So it comes down to cost.
I don't think it will ever happen.
Okay.
I think just in terms of material, we won't go there. So there will be electric cars and a higher price range, and there will be other solution for the lower price range. But for a pure battery electric vehicle car of 500 kilometers under 20k, I hope I'm wrong. Yeah. I really hope I'm wrong, because that would be awesome. And but I will bet against that. I say never.
Yeah, I think what is a common mistake, what you can't do, is just to extrapolate, right? So just to say that, like, I don't know, like 5 years ago, I'm not sure, but probably the best electric vehicle was the Tesla Model S that had around 500 kilometers of range. And I'm not sure if it actually had that much back then, but let's just say it had. And it was 80, 90k, and now you have the Model 3, which is half of that, right? And now you wait another 5 years and you have half of that again. Of course.
Well, you surely shouldn't linearly extrapolate, because then you go to negative prices at some point, so you should put some kind of decay.
Yeah, sure. So you do an exponential decay, but still, this is still a pretty naive thing to do, of course, because somewhere you just hit the rock bottom of resource prices, right? But as we already established, I'm just a big believer in technological progress.
Science.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm a pessimist.
One of those naysayers. So, but I'm just a little bit more optimistic. I mean, that's probably a little bit naive, or I don't know. It's just so hard to say. I'm assuming that something will happen, and we will have something by 2025 that is less than 20k and provides more than 500 kilometers of range, of actual range, not WLTP range, but actual range, right?
Yeah, not with me driving it.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. How do you think this will impact our world? Imagine every car is electric, or is at least zero emission in some way or another. How do you think this will change the cities? How do you think it will change our lives?
I think not at all. I mean, of course, if that really happens, gas stations will vanish over time. I mean, at least become less. But of course, this doesn't really impact our lives so much on a daily basis. So I don't think. I mean, of course.
You're laughing, yeah, but there's some guy out there who owns all the gas stations in Europe.
I'm sorry, Mr. Shell. Of course, it will impact your life, but. No, the point I'm trying to make is that, of course, maybe we can avoid climate change to become such a catastrophe, that much of a catastrophe. So, of course, this will impact our life, but not compared to today, but compared to our future without that happening.
Yeah.
And I mean, compared to today, I think it will just be like always, and people just driving electric cars, right? I mean, I don't think that this really changes our behavior so much. It's just a different type of technology.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the fact that it will maybe help us prevent the apocalypse.
Yeah,
It
sure.
won't really affect our...
But I mean, this is just, from the day's perspective, it's just way too abstract, so I'm not even considering it.
No, I mean, I think in terms of daily lives, and aside from the not burning part, it will make cities nicer. You will have less emissions in cities. You'll have less smog. I mean, not less particulates, and it may actually improve people's brain function, intelligence.
But
I'm not the kind of guy who's like.
I think I agree that you can probably measure that people in cities are going to be a little bit more healthy, but just from like I understood your question more from a my personal experience perspective, and I don't think that it will really change how I feel when I walk around in a city. I mean, also a very important aspect of that is that, which is I think a common misconception, is that electric cars are really not. I mean, they're just as loud as internal combustion cars in the city, right? If you're not trying
because of the roll noise, the wind noise, everything is much more dominating over the engine.
And when a car in the city drives past you with an internal combustion engine, and it's not some weird modified exhaust, then you basically don't hear the engine at all. So it really won't change that. So this is, for example, something that won't change, and so I don't think that really your day-to-day experience will be changed by widespread adoption. I was
hoping that everybody's IQ goes up like 20 points, and then we finally
that would be cool.
solve a mass loss problem. Everybody, I agree. I don't think there will be super huge impact. I think it will mostly be the air will be a little bit nicer. It will be there will be a few petrol stations closing. People maybe drive their cars a bit differently.
Yeah.
Because they can accelerate more. I don't know, man. But in the end, it will be the same. And that's good, right? Mm-hmm. Because it may help us prevent the apocalypse.